popped it all off, came off really easy, and now I have little baby. Okay? So, you can see that. Now the silicone, you mix it up, after you measure out your equal parts and you mix it up and you pour it in, you got to get the air bubbles out of there. And they'll rise to the surface kind of naturally, but you want to try and encourage it by vibrating it a little bit, hopefully get those air bubbles off the surface. Why would you want, there's a couple of reasons why you want to get the air bubbles out. Now with the latex ones, you don't have the air bubbles because you're brushing it on nice and smooth. But if you're pouring it on and there's air bubbles in it, that can cause a couple of different problems. Any ideas what those problems might be? You can weaken, you're going to have mold, you've got holes in your mold inside. That makes it weak. So it would be good for 1 or 2, but if you've got a lot of air bubbles in there, you're certainly not going to get up to 20 castings with it. It's going to fall apart. So you want those air bubbles out, but there's another reason.
Is it going to cause the shape to change, the air bubbles, the fact that they're air?
Kind of.
Not
quite.
The baby would have pimples.
She's got it. The bubbles will stick to the surface of your sculpture. And so when you pop it out, well, now your mold has little holes in it. Well, now you pour in your plaster. Well, that plaster went into those little holes, and now you've got pimples all over your baby's face. And you got to go back and you got to scrape them all off, and that is a pain in the tushy. Well, when it is the silicone, when it's still wet, you can stick them with a pin.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And so you're trying to bounce those air bubbles off. Or, with this one that we'll get to in a little bit, I brushed on some silicone first to make sure, I'll talk about this one a little bit, to try and make sure I didn't have air bubbles, and then I poured it in the rest of the way. We'll get to that one in a minute. So now let's come back to this one. Old painting hose. Great. So, this was,
There it is.
new one, silicone. Here's how I made this one. I took my sculpture and I said, man, I need something to make a mold in. Something that'll hold the shape. 5-gallon bucket. It just fit in perfectly with just a little space around those wingtips and the point. Perfect. So I took it and I sealed it down to the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket. My original sculpture. So the clay was down in the bucket. And I gently put on some silicone. Now this silicone is thicker and you can kind of brush it on and it doesn't flow so much. You can also buy some that are very, very liquid and you just fill the whole thing up and just let it set. Either way, this is very expensive, so I went with, instead of filling up all of this empty space with expensive silicone, I went with the brushable kind that wouldn't flow so much. Got that done. Oh, after I put forgot a step. After I got my sculpture down in there, I coated the entire thing with Vaseline. All the inside of that bucket was completely filled with Vaseline so that I could get this out later. So once that silicone was in there, now I needed a mother mold so that this would hold its shape. But there are complex undercuts on this thing. I had to have a 2-part mother mold. So it's down in the bucket, covered in silicone. I took some more clay and I built a wall up on those wings with some modeling clay, just straight up, straight to the sides of the bucket. And so I then had 2 parts. I filled 1 part with plaster. I think I started with this side. Filled 1 part with plaster. And this is a lot of plaster, and I think I'm making a mess around here. You can see some newspaper I shoved in there just to lighten it a little bit and take up some of the mass. Let that set. Then once that's set, I removed the clay wall. Now I've got raw plaster there. But these fit together really nice. What did I have to do next before I could put
Vaseline
the
on
rest
the
of
edge
this?
of those things so they don't stick together.
I had to put a release agent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to make your bolts.
Yeah, I don't think I did that on this one. Because this is a mother mold. If I was doing that, if it was the surface of the final sculpture, I probably would have. But since it's a mother mold, and it was just a simple fit,
In my two-part, I use toothpicks.
use toothpicks.
Yeah, well, not the
Those are
toothpicks,
tiny
actually the barbecue sticks.
Oh, the
I
skewers.
stuck
Those are good.
Stuck
Those
those
are good.
in there and it was like, that lined me up, you know.
So inside there, I had, inside the bucket, I had that. So then I coated all of this with Vaseline. And all the rest of the bucket's coated with Vaseline and poured in the rest of it on top. Let it all set. And this is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Once it's all set, and I let it get really good and set, it was hours. I think I let it sit overnight, came back the next day, turned over the bucket, popped it out. And
Do you have to do any work on your final product because of seepage?
Absolutely.
And,
Yes.
Okay.
so, all right, that leads us to the next question of casting.
Right.
So I've got this lovely little thing here all together. And something I discovered when I did these was, notice they don't have a flat bottom. Well, if I'm gonna pour something in there, it's gonna roll out this end where it's down low. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna be smart, I'll make some little dots on it that didn't work. The best thing to do is just to have a level surface, and wet things like to level out nicely. So if it's all wet right at the start, I've got a nice level bottom now to pour everything in. I learned all these things the hard way. No one bothered to teach me, even though I asked. I asked lots of people. So now I've got this hole, the shape of my sculpture in there, and I put there's actually a lot of steel in here for casting. I take steel wire and fit it all in these little places just to give it some strength. Because plaster is brittle. I mean, it'll crack. Well, there's enough steel in here, it can take a good beating, and it probably won't break. Put the steel in there and pour the plaster right in on it and give it some wiggles and whatnot, and then while it just starting to set, figure out my little hanging system, get that into the plaster, and let it set. Now, his question was, do I have to clean it up when it comes out? Well, this is a one-part mold, so I don't have to worry about that too much, but yes, I cannot, with all the little details on here, there are air bubbles every single time. So I've got to fill in air bubbles, or with the plaster going in, there's air bubbles, and I've just got to go back with a little bit of plaster and fill them all in. And yeah, so there's a lot of
I
cleaning.
mean, the mold's gonna break down eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah, you know, and I mean,
But I'm really
that's
careful
what
with
you
it.
get, is you get little flaws in your.
With as much work as these take, I'm really careful with them, so. Yeah.
What would you sell that for after all the work you've got into it?
The
Yeah.
end product,
What,
well, it depends on how many I could make off the mold
Oh, okay.
and divide up the price. I actually looked into maybe mass producing some of these. Not for like selling around the United States, you know, but to people who were interested. And I'm a good boy, and I contacted the Boy Scouts. I said, may I have the rights to this? This isn't for like a big business. No, you've got to, oh gosh, you have to have insurance for this, like thousands of dollars just for the rights to make this, and it just wasn't worth it. So I just make them and give them to friends and family. So.
it just seems like a tremendous amount of work to get one of those.
This one was a labor of love. Now, this one is for business. And so you can see it's a silicone rubber mold, and
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I'm always experimenting. So
It's
I like you guys, but this is a big deal to take
This
apart.
is
So I'll
a
just
creative
point out some
piece.
things. This is a woman standing on a tall pedestal, and these are her arms up here. These are her elbows, and that's her head.
Oh,
Okay. And her feet are right about there, and then there's a pedestal that she's standing on. Okay? So that's that. But this is a 3-part mold. In order to get in her hands are up here by her face, so there's this space that I have to deal with this part of the mold. There's a 3rd part up here between this part and this part. And this is plaster mother mold on top of the silicone rubber. There's a 2-part silicone, 3 parts. Each mother mold also has a separate part with silicone, and you have to do one at a time. So when I said I made that part and then let it set and put plaster or Vaseline on it and then do the next part, well, that has to be done with each one of these. So it had to be done with each part of the silicone, and then I had to go back and make sure and do it with each part of the plaster. So this was a lot of work. I've made 2 castings off this so far, and I'm selling them for $1,000 each. But each one is different, however. These I'm not casting in bronze. I'm doing my own special natural material things with it. They're getting coated with photographs and snake skins and all sorts of fun things. Each one's different. You can see some of those on my website also. My mold isn't so pretty. It's kind of lumpy and bumpy. There's a piece of wood in here because this is really thin. There's a piece of wood here, and a piece of wood here, and a piece of wood here. Inside the plaster, just hold that shape. I don't want it sagging and flopping and breaking like this one did. So I learned my lesson. So this is a very strong mold. Should last a while. How are we doing on time? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
So
What did you put
then
in?
I got fancy, huh?
What did you put that in to make it like that?
I didn't. I didn't have anything big enough. So this actually was laying on my table.
Oh, you sculpted
I
it.
supported it. I put silicone down one side. I actually had to make a wall
With
all the
clay.
way with clay all the way around my sculpture. And did the silicone, and then did the mother mold over that section. Let that all set. Flip it over. Rebuild the wall a little bit. Do the silicone. Do the mother mold. Make sure to put the Vaseline in between them. Then finish off the top section, the 3rd part. All the same process over again. So it was a few days process just making this mold. And then of course you gotta cast it, and that takes time too. And then you gotta clean up the casting. And every place where the mold pieces come together, more than likely than not, some of your casting stuff is going to go into there. No matter how tight that mold is, it's going to go in there. So then you get it out, and you've got this little thin flappy thing on your sculpture. That's called flashing. And it cuts off very easy, but again, that's time. How many of you have seen the baseball figures around Busch Stadium? Yes? You guys know who made those?
I did know, but
Harry Weber. He's a friend of mine.
Okay.
He's blessed me. He bought some of my pieces, and we traded some sculptures. I definitely traded up. So I got some small bronzes of his, but every time you cast in bronze, and the bigger you get, the more pieces you have to make. And then you cast those in wax, and then you make a mold of those, and you cast them in bronze, and then you got to weld all the bronze together and cut off all the flashing. You know why those are like hundreds of thousands of dollars each.
yeah.
And actually the sculptor just gets a small portion of that because the foundry that's doing all the grunt work is earning a lot of that money too. And bronze isn't cheap either. So anyway, this I could cast in bronze. I could actually pour wax into this and make a wax copy and then put that in a waste mold. or send it, more than likely I'd send that off to a foundry and let them do that for me. And foundries will use all sorts of stuff for their waste mold, the mold that's meant to go away. It's just supposed to hold this shape for one casting. They'll use ceramic slip molds. They'll actually coat it with thin layers of clay, and that fires when they melt out the wax. They'll use, I've seen some places use plaster reinforced with sand. Aluminum actually is used also. They will make an aluminum mold, pour in the molten bronze, and just melt off the aluminum because the bronze has a higher melting point. It's just amazing stuff that some of these places do, and lots of different costs. So that is a very complex mold and takes some time. This mold I had professionally made. Notice how pretty it is. So there's one of my sculptures was made in there. And I have had a couple of bronze castings made of it. I don't think I'll open it up, but her head is here in this bump, and there's two arms rising up in this space. So there's a sheet of silicone over here and a sheet of silicone over here. So that wall I was talking about, well, basically he didn't bother with a wall. He got a big pile of wet, gooey clay, heated it up so it's really soft, and he just pushed the sculpture down in it. Just remember when I was doing those into the wet plaster? Basically the same idea, but he was doing it with like modeling clay or something. And then he would do one side and make it all pretty, and then he took it out and did the other side, and then he cut with a really nice sharp knife all the way down to clean up the edges and two-part mold. And all of this reddish stuff on there, that is the wax that he used to pour in to make copies of it. So there was bright red wax copies of my sculpture that he then put in other molds and cast in bronze. Now, there's all sorts of things you can cast into your molds that you can make your duplicates of.
Would you do
Plastic.
plastic? You know, like plastic?
Yes, we're going to get to that.
Or even, sorry.
You can do all sorts of things.
You can't. do
Plaster is nice and cheap and easy, and buy it really cheap at the hardware store and pour it in, and you've got a copy, but it is fragile. And like I said with this, if it's something nice, put some steel in it, and that takes some time to get your steel in there. However, there's other things. You could, the wax cast in bronze. Something that I've just started experimenting with is resin. This is basically plastic, and there's, as I was telling you, I have a concept, and I needed to find the right material to match my concept. And so I needed crystal clear resin. I didn't want it to have any color in it, nothing, and I needed it to be relatively easy. And I found that a gallon of this stuff, I bought this just to experiment with. A gallon of this is $100. And for the sculpture I want to make, it would take a gallon. Just one shot to make my sculpture. And so it's going to take some time. So I did a little test first. Now here's my idea. So I'm an environmentalist. To explain why I did what I did here. I'm an environmentalist. I hate seeing trash on the ground, and I live in St. Charles by the river. Whenever I walk by the river, there is just trash floating down the river. Most of it plastic, because plastic is less dense than water, so it floats. Soda bottles and all sorts of stuff. And so I will literally carry a bag with me when I go for walks around my neighborhood and pick up plastic as I see it. Otherwise, it gets washed into the storm drain, into the creek, into the river, down to the Gulf of Mexico, out into the ocean. And have you heard of the ocean gyres, or those floating islands of plastic? Have you heard about that? Well, it's not an island that you can walk on or anything, but all the plastic has different densities, and so some is on the top, and some is floating maybe 20 feet down until the pressure, and it's just...
Didn't a lot of that come from Japan when they had the...
It's coming from all over the world. but yes, a lot of it from Japan. And a lot of Japan's fishing boats, so if any Japanese people are watching this, I'm sorry, but you're screwing up our oceans. Fishing trawlers will just dump their plastic fishing nets out there. They're torn up, just throw them in the water. And they're catching, well, those plastics are leaching toxins into the water, they're killing fish. Sea turtles are out there gagging on plastic bags because they think there's jellyfish floating out there. And so that bothers me greatly. I read a statistic that 10% of the plastic that's in the ocean came from the land. People dropping it on the road, it's washing into the creek, and off it goes. So,
And also
that's
keep
my
in mind,
10%.
that also makes it back into the food chain, so you're eating it.
you
'Cause
eat
the
it.
Fish
Goes
eat
into
it.
the fish that they're fishing, and we get to eat all the toxins
eat
that
all the
came out of the
toxins,
plastic
yeah.
in the fish. I saw pictures of baby albatross, those birds, where the parents were feeding the babies, and the parents were out gathering up things that looked like food, bottle caps and all sorts of things, and feeding them to the babies, and the babies basically starved to death with their stomach full of plastic. And I saw pictures where the babies were rotting on the beach and their just stomach was all this plastic exposed. It was just terrible, terrible, terrible. And I don't want to be a part of that. I'd rather be the solution. So here's my idea, was to take animals that are harmed by our plastic and sculpt them and make them look as though they are water, but they're filled with bits of plastic that I've claimed from the ground. And so I want to make adult-sized ones that are hanging from a ceiling of a gallery, so when you go in, it's like you're walking underwater and here's the sea turtles swimming all around you, is my idea. And some of them will maybe have plastic hanging out of them, but you can see these are my first 2 experiments. This one has a loose flipper because I tried to see if after I cast it, if I could mess with it more. I couldn't, but I found that out with my experiment here. So here is baby sea turtle. Where did I put it? Here it is. You can pass that around too. Baby sea turtle,
How do you
built a
get the
wall
bulb
around
out?
him. Okay.
How do you get the bulbs out of
How do I get the bulb?
that? Yeah.
Well, they tend to rise out on it.
Yeah, they
Sometimes
do,
It takes a
but I
really
mean-
long time. So brush some silicone in a little bit, poured it in the rest of the way into my wall. And so then I did the same thing that I did with the baby. I took the wall off, made a bigger wall, and you can pass that around to me if you like. And so that's all down on the board, and then made a mother mold around it. There's no reinforcement or anything in this mother mold, but it doesn't need to be. And there is kind of a key in there as well. Notice my little key to make sure everything lines up well. Not that it really needs it for this, but just in case. And so there's a big undercut for that head. See that?
Yeah.
Couldn't do that with a plaster mold. Has to be done with something flexible. One of the nice things I found about this resin, plastic resin, is it shrinks slightly when it sets. And it sets with heat. It's strangest stuff. You add there's a little thing, you add a catalyst to this, just a few drops, and it goes through a reaction and it starts warming up and inside there, and it cures itself. And I put it in the sun just to let it cure a little bit more. And so while that was still goopy, and it takes hours for it to set, and it smells horrible, I have to do it outside.
Say, what kind of toxic stuff
It
is that?
said, the instructions said, of course, you can do it inside with good ventilation. And after I did it outside and smelled how bad it was, there's no amount of ventilation that can
Right.
my outside smell. So that's outside. This is an extra little bit of just, I don't know, bananas or something came in that. That's just to help me lift this out later. Just a nice little easy thing to do. So while those were poured in there, I shoved some bits of plastic I found from my walks. Are you breaking my sculptures? Shame on you. It's fine. They're just tests. That's exactly all they are.
What did you do?
And no, actually, I broke it first. She's just knocking the pieces off for me. So my little baby sea turtles. Did you guys want to see my mold too? And so that is my idea there. Hopefully, I'll have some time to make some bigger ones. I had to get back to my normal artwork. This is obviously very different than I usually make with sticks and twigs and grass and whatnot. But, oh, the resin. The resin. There are lots and lots and lots of different kinds of this stuff, and they're all different chemical makeups, and some are different colors, some are clear. I wanted clear. This is, I can't remember what this is made out of. Polyvinyl chloride maybe, but there's epoxy resins as well.
You gotta add a catalyst to that.
You gotta add a catalyst. So I'm experimenting. I've emptied out maybe that much of it so far. So
The epoxy is a two-part.
it's yes, you could consider this a two-part too, because you have to add a few drops of catalyst. But the epoxy I think is two-part, and that like is almost twice as expensive as this stuff.
Yeah.
So yes,
Does that get hot as it sets?
as it cures, it does get warm. I would not consider it hot, but yes, the heat does cure it. And that's the whole point of the catalyst, is just
That was
simply.
my wife. She was casting, I remember, she was casting some roses. She wanted to put some roses in a clear plastic thing. So she used some kind of epoxy resin. And of course, the roses discolored and died
As well,
because
yes,
of heat.
yes. I don't know if the epoxy needs heat to dry though, or to set, excuse me, not dry, to set. I haven't because they cost twice as much, I wasn't interested in researching them that much. So,
I'm pretty sure it's room temperature.
most epoxies cure at room temperature, but things I found with epoxy is after they've cured, heat will soften. So if I use epoxy glue to stick something together, if I get it up to 150 degrees, it starts softening. So that's something I've learned. But
Have you seen this reality show Face Off? Where they make, oh my gosh, you ought to watch it.
face off, what are they facing off?
No, it's sculpting, and
Oh.
they're doing just what you're doing here, only in a 3-day time period. They're given it's a reality, kind of reality
Fun.
competition. Unbelievable what they can do, what they've done, and
bet.
you need to watch it sometime.
Is it on
Masks
cable?
like
It's
Cleons.
But
They make
Face off.
masks and so on like Cleons.
yeah, they're given different
Oh,
tasks,
sure.
do this, something from outer space or whatever, and they gotta do their own interpreting and make their own molds, everything. They do everything themselves.
It's pretty
It's
wild.
amazing what they
I'll
do.
look that up online. I'm sure it's on YouTube or something.
It
Oh,
probably
that's
is.
another thing. Latex and the silicone. The silicone comes in all kinds of colors and stuff. Yeah, the Hollywood movie monster people,
Yeah.
Yes.
they'll
That's kind of what
make
these are.
they'll make a mold, put this in as the finals. They'll cast with the latex or the silicone.
And then
Instead
put
of
it
using it
over
as a mold making material, they'll use it as the final cast and to glue on and become
Mhm, right.
your monster parts.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah,
So that's what
this
this
show
shows.
is very, have
Okay.
you seen it?
no, a
Okay.
friend of mine has told me about it.
It's really interesting.
Virginia drag kids?
Yeah, I know Virginia.
Do you?
Yeah, I haven't seen her in a couple of years, but yeah,
Amazing person, really.
she's great.
Yeah.
She-
She used to belong to the club.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, we used to
Very good.
do things over her place.
She's a fun lady. Yeah.
Does Virginia do casting also?
Did she do
Does
anything like
Virginia
this?
do mold making?
Did she do stuff?
She did a
I know
lot
she's
of-
doing
Yeah,
caustics.
she did, we
She-
did some old stuff.
I think she's tried her hand at just about everything.
I think so.
Which I like to too, so, we're creative people.
So in place of the Vaseline or something like
For
paint
those of
spray or-
you,
Yes, just a thin layer. The thing with it, if it's more liquid on plaster, if the plaster has dried a little bit, it'll soak it up and then it won't be a release agent. So if there's still moisture in the plaster, the oil won't soak in and it'll be fine. But, yeah.
What is your favorite art endeavor? Is it painting, sculpting,
I am truly a sculptor at heart.
Sculptor.
I think in 3D.
Okay.
I am a talented painter. I've done many nice paintings. I just don't enjoy it as much as sculpting. So
Okay.
I actually teach drawing at Maryville University.
At Maryville?
Love drawing. But the time it takes with painting, I'd just much rather sculpt. So anyway, okay, so questions.
And the fellow who did the downtown,
Harry Weber. Yeah.
Harry Weber.
I've been to his studio and I've seen, and the guy who does most of his mold making did this one for me. And out at Westport Plaza, is it, where there's the large Pujols statue? It's about 12 feet tall. I saw the molds for that, and they're just, he's like cut up into big squares. Sculptures, there's like this square piece of latex that's this part of his torso, the square piece of latex that's this part of his torso, and then there's a mother mold that goes for each part, all over it, and it's just piled up. And well, those things get used like once. How many people want a 12-foot tall Pujols? You know, and that was while he was still here. Now I'm sure nobody wants one, but
Yeah, that's what he had his restaurant out there.
yes, it's right next to his restaurant. So all that work that goes into making that silicone and that mother mold, and well, the guy got paid for it, but just made one. So
I wonder if it's still there. I have no idea.
I haven't been over there for
I
a while.
haven't either.
I don't know. I was there at the dedication, and that was it.
And that
So,
was it, yeah. Okay.
So,
If there's one thing that you think would be the most important tip with mold making and casting, what would it be for a newbie?
Simpler is better. The simpler you can make, well, that's almost a life lesson right there. The simpler you can do it, the better it is. So all these multi-parts that I was doing and getting fancy with, I'm going to save material and reinforce it, and that was a waste of my time right there. I got too fancy. This was simple. This was better. So
That's what I did.
But you had to do that before you got simple.
I learned.
So
So now I've told you, so you can go right to the easy,
Right.
simple.
Yeah.
So
Right.
What's the little piece that you have? No, the blue one. Yeah, what is that?
that was one of the first castings. And I had, well, you can see the wire in there. It was kind of destroyed in the mold making process. This was, in order to make the second one, I decided to go back and I went to the original one, but there was some damage on it. I decided to just go back with one that was really good and solid that I cast from it and make the mold off of that, but it kind of got destroyed. And that's all right. And some of this dark stuff on there, so the blue on there is the mold, a little bit. That's weird, that normally doesn't happen. I think it's because it was plaster, and I left it in there for a couple of months before I removed it. This is actually epoxy putty. I repaired it with epoxy putty, just resculpted. Have you ever used epoxy putty?
It's hot.
It gets hot. It's great. It sticks on. I sculpt with it. I've made whole sculptures out of epoxy putty. And yeah, so, and I didn't have any steel reinforcement in here, and that all broke off. But now he can flap his wing. So.
Have you done any molten metal made any of your sculptures?
I have done some bronze casting. Yeah, that was what those milkweed pods were for. When I was in grad school at Fontbonne, they have a small foundry there.
Oh, I was gonna say you need some
And we
special-
did small castings there. This was getting a little bit large for that foundry, and I wanted to have the experience of working with a professional foundry, so I did an experiment there, just see how that works. So yeah, I've done some molten stuff, but better yet, some jewelry. I actually have 3 years of training as a jewelry metalsmith, and they have jeweler's wax. It's a very hard wax, and you carve into it, and file it, and heat up little tools and melt your designs, whatever, and you can make your rings out of it. You can make a wax ring and you cast it with the lost wax process, but you can cast it with silver instead of bronze, or gold if you like. If you go to any jeweler, and if they're doing custom work, they're all back there with hard wax and little tiny casting facilities. So they have these steel tubes, and they'll put, they'll take a stick of wax, and they'll stick all these rings all over this wax, and so they've got let me see, the stick is a sprue, and it's got all these little rings sticking off of it, and they fit that down inside this steel sleeve and pour in their investment, which is basically plaster, and fill it up. They turn it over, melt the wax out, so now they've got a hole with lots of little ring holes in there, and then they take their gold, their silver, whatever it is, in a little crucible, and they'll either heat that up in a kiln or they'll take torches to it, depending on how much it is. You can cast it, melt enough silver for a ring or two with just a blowtorch and pour it in, but better yet, they use a sling cast sometimes, or a gravity sling. They'll put that on whip it around or they'll have a machine that does it, and it slings that molten metal right into there, and no air bubbles at all because the force of that metal going in there. And so there's a lot of casting. Casting is used all around us. Everything plastic you have was in a mold, done just like that.
When did you know you wanted to be a sculptor? Is it something like you were playing with Play-Doh as a kid and you're like, I'm going to be a sculptor when I grow up? Or like...
I've just there was no single moment.
There wasn't a cathartic moment?
Because that's about all I ever did. When I was in elementary school, I realized probably about 3rd or 4th grade that I was different than everybody else, and I was the artist. And so I actually wanted to be different than everybody else, so I kind of embraced that. And all the way through the rest of my school, I was the artist. Probably in high school, you experiment with everything. But I always loved coming back to sculpture. And this is kind of sad, even when I was in college, amongst art students, more often than not, I was still the artist. I don't know.
That's sad? I think
that's sad. That's great for me. It's kind of sad for these other people. If you're in art school, you should be the artist too. But anyway, they're great people. But yeah, I'm the one who lives the starving artist lifestyle. So they all went and got real jobs and 401ks. So I'm living the dream. I'm teasing.
I hear you.
So yeah, I've kind of always known that I loved sculpture. There wasn't any defining moment for that.
Was there anyone who was really important in your artistic life that really helped mold you as a sculptor?
I'm going to pretend I'm at the Academy Awards now. I'd like to thank my mother. She was a great influence on me for my artistic career. She was actually an elementary school art teacher, and she did 2 things that were the best things she could have ever done for me, which was give me a bunch of stuff to mess with and leave me alone to mess with it. Hours and hours I just spent in my room all by myself messing with stuff, building stuff out of spools or yarn, or she'd let me have her paints and whatnot. When I moved out of the house in my early 20s, the first thing she'd thank goodness, and that I wasn't out of the house 3 days, and she had crews in there ripping the carpet out. Because for 18 years or so, there was paint and wax and plaster just all worked into the carpet real good. And
thanks, Mom.
Yeah, she's a delight. So.
Well, a huge round of applause for Adam's wonderful demonstration. Thank you very much.
I don't know if anybody's going to use this, but at least you know how.
Yes.
Oh, and they sell this stuff at Michael's. And they actually sell little molds, too, for like if you wanted to make plastic jewelry or whatever. Have some fun with that.
You go to Hobby Lobby and take the 40% discount to get the aluminite if you want to use that stuff.
They have that at Hobby Lobby?
Yeah, Hobby
I
Lobby
always-
carries that, and the mold.
I always go to Michael's with my 40% off coupon. Buy
Yeah.
one thing and say, have a nice day, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Come back with the next 40% off coupon.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much for having me. Greatly appreciated. Hope you had some fun.
Thank you. It was a
Yeah.
lot of
Thank you.
You did, it was very interesting.
Right.